Hello and welcome to the Ireland on the Fly podcast about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland. If you're into saltwater fly fishing, by all accounts, 2022 seems to have been the year of the pollock, with large numbers and large sizes of the fish being caught right throughout the season. So are we seeing more pollock being caught because more anglers are targeting them on the fly, and what has happened to the bass? To find out more for this week's episode, we're joined by Richie Ryan of corkbass.com, who is a guide specialising in catching pollock on the fly. And Tom, before we hear from Richie, this was an episode I was particularly interested in, as we have been seeing more and more catches of this species of fish.
Yeah, hi Darry. Yeah, we have actually, and this one really pricked my ears up when you mentioned this one to me, because I think it's something that I knew very little about, but I had heard of guys who have targeted pollock, and chatting to Richie, it was absolutely fascinating. Like I've never tried it. You haven't, have you?
No. And see, what I'm interested in this was, and I think because you were saying to me, God, yeah, this would, we should definitely find out about this, was that it's become a thing now, and it's a bit like, we had pike on the fly, and pike is becoming more popular as well. Now, I think that's more to do it as well as because it's the winter, it's, anglers' chance to get out. But people now are turning more to the pollock than the bass. And that's what Richie goes into, isn't it? Like that, he'll say to his clients, if he's taking them out guiding, look, yeah, you can try bass for a while if you want. And if you're not catching, here, let's have a go for the pollock. Because he was saying, was it lads, South African friends he takes out, and there's like 30, 40 fish in a day? Like,
it's phenomenal, isn't it? And you can see why. And like, I could understand as well. I mean, I think when you talk about saltwater fly fishing, and we've talked about it here before on the podcast, initially we think of bass, and that's what comes to mind. And as he says, primarily, I suppose people will go to him for that with bass in mind. But, what has happened now is, a lot of his sessions just end up in primarily chasing after the pollock. And you can see why when you hear catches like that.
And I wonder then, is it going to be then, like, suddenly you get a mindset change with anglers? Because I know myself for 2023 now, I'm going to start looking to do that in the sense, it almost becomes, you're going after the pollock, you're catching fish, you've got a bend in the rod, and if you happen to catch a bass, or if you decide, you know what, I see a few bass over there, I'll have a go for an hour or so, but you're primarily focused then, and the bass nearly become a side catch, like.
Isn't it? Yeah, but doesn't it sound like a perfect day's fishing?
Don't say that to the bass anglers.
Yeah, well, I suppose, and we'll use the old cliche, the tug is the drug. Do you know?
Because I know we focused on the fly, but like on the lures, what I wonder is, I presume it's just as easy then in terms of, but is it easier on the fly for the pollock for some reason than the bass?
That's interesting, actually. Yeah, and I think next time, because we're talking about having Richie on again, I think we'll have to just check that one out. Because I know with me here, I mean, Jackie Coyne, who a lot of the listeners will know, like Jackie lives back in Pollock Glass, beside Renville, and Jackie looks down at the Atlantic, and Jackie will often say, oh, it was perfect. I just crossed the road, went down into the rocks, and started spinning for pollock. And it goes on, and he's always asking me back, and it's like everything else. The small bucket list, we know about it. Yeah. But, he really goes on about it. He says they're great crack, and all he does is spin. And I've asked him before about the flies, and just where he is, it's just easier to spin for, and it's probably more productive as well. But definitely, I'm sorry we didn't check with Richie about that, because it sounds as if you have just as much sport on them with the lures as well.
If you're targeting bass, they'll always say to, look, find them on the lures first. You'll find that you'll know they're there, and then you can switch over. So you're not kind of, wasting your time, that it's easier to try and kind of find them with the lures first. Whereas I got the sense talking to Richie with the pollocks is you just find those deep drop-offs, the rocks, get a, sinking line down into them.
Yeah.
And you're in with a very good chance. And also the other thing he was saying is it's not tide dependent, spring tide dependent or anything like that.
Yeah. And that's the thing, as I've said here before, that always flummoxed me as a stillwater, or should we say an inland angler. The tides throw me. I'm not used to tides. I didn't grow up fishing around tides. So when I hear guys on about it for bass, sort of going, oh God, that's another thing in the equation that I have to find out about. Whereas, when he was talking about the pollock, doesn't seem to matter.
No, it's just, and like you said, and there's the South African guys that we mentioned that they now just come, that's it, pollock. They're not interested in the bass net. It's just pollock on the fly, and that's it. And who could blame them? I think
who could blame them?
What was it? His best was £10 plus.
Could you imagine what that would be like on the fly? Absolutely fantastic. And the tactics were very interesting as well. And if you listen, Richie explains how he fishes and everything, because I brought up, if you look on his website, he's from a drifting boat, but it's not your classic lock style drifting as I thought it was from the picture. But he goes through it, and it's well worth to listen to.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's something I'm going to keep an eye on. I'm going to try it definitely in 2023. Richie, I'll be booking you. And also, I'm just interested to keep an eye out to see if we start seeing more stories, more catches, because it suddenly then becomes a kind of fulfilling kind of thing.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I'm wondering, I would be interested to see if 2023 becomes even more so the Pollock year. It'd be interesting to keep an eye on it.
You just mentioned it there. We're going to have to change the name of the small bucket list and the big bucket list, because the small bucket list is getting very small in that it can't hold all these things I want to do, which are really, really quite easy to do. I mean, so we'll maybe call it the minor bucket list.
You'll need to take a gap year, or what do they call it? A year out.
Or what do you call it?
Where I don't know, you have to go find yourself, Tom, for a year, go fishing elsewhere. Because there's no way you would have the time.
No. That always gets me. It's like everything. I mean, there's so many places that I'd love to get to fish, but I'm too busy on the car. Look, first world problem.
Yes,
that's what
exactly.
It's first world problem.
You get to listen to the podcast instead and talk to people about it.
I do, and you can tell me what it's like then.
yeah. I'll bring the recorder.
Will you?
Well, look, I tell you what. Let's hear from Richie right now. And I first asked him about why people are increasingly targeting pollock over bass.
If somebody wants to catch a bass on the fly, we can spend the whole time, maybe 3 or 4 hours doing that. But what I tend to offer the client is that we can do maybe an hour or two on the bass, and if they're not playing ball, we switch to pollock on the fly. And the pollock on the fly this year I wrote a piece there for Inland Fisheries Ireland only a few weeks ago. There are 2 South African friends of mine. One is living here, Dr. Jacques Bronkhorst, and his buddy Bads Badenhurst. He comes every other year, but they said the best pollock on the fly that they've ever had here in Ireland. Best fishing on the fly. And these guys fish all over the world. But in relation to the bass on the fly, I might start with that. Yeah, when we targeted them, we had some good days, definitely. I didn't experience the amount of bass that 1 or 2. There's a guy called Becky Collins had some very good fishing, not with the fly, but generally he's been doing very, very well, and so that seemingly they are there. But in September, when I went up the estuaries myself, I went back to the estuaries. I used to do a fair bit of estuary fishing for both on lure and fly, but I just stuck to the fly this time. And the old adage that how do you catch more fish in the fly? You leave the other rods at home. So
pretty simple, but true.
Yeah. So I went back up to the estuaries, and I think out of the 4 days, I brought my good friend Kevin McLaughlin up one of the days, and that was the only day. That was the only day out of the 4 days that I didn't catch anything, and he hadn't caught one on the fly this year. He's an expert fly fisherman himself, but I was very happy that they were back up. They were there in the estuary. I was fishing it like a river, casting out and letting the fly swing around, and then bang. Now, I didn't have a huge amount of fish. I think one of the days 4 fish was the most I had. But it was nice to see that they were back up in the estuaries. Now, they may have been there all the time. Something you might be interested in is I was involved in the bass tagging program with the ESB. There was Dr. Tom Doyle, I think he's doctor now, Damien Haberlin, and another guy called Jim Clahasy. We tagged the bass here in the harbour. It was acoustic tagging, and the batteries lasted for a year, and we found that the bass...
Sorry, Richie, just you say, what do you mean by acoustic tagging?
Sorry, acoustic tagging is where we inserted a kind of, I suppose, a transducer, or not a transducer, but it transmits a signal, and it's about half the size of a AAA battery. So, but it was inserted into the bass. The bass had to be quite big to in order to take this. So they were anesthetized, and we found that 20 out of the 30 that we did, 28 came back to the. But the most interesting thing about it is they came back to the exact same location. These batteries lasted for a year, so they had various receivers around the harbour, so they were able to tell that they came.
Oh, so by that you mean the tags could be picked up electronically. The fish didn't have to be caught again.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Ah.
Once they passed the receiver, it was noted where the fish were. So we got some up in the estuaries, and I think the first two, the 28 that they think we tagged 30, and we think maybe the first two, maybe they died because maybe we were starting off. Maybe it was something we did incorrectly or whatever.
Right.
But another interesting aspect of that was one of the fish was bleeding very heavily. A big bass, about 6 or 7 pounds that I caught, and that I pleaded with Tom Doyle, because these, I think, were at the time, they were 300 or 400 euros for each. I pleaded with Tom to tag this one, and he did actually come back. And I called all the bass after my children and after my brothers and sisters. Yeah, so they all had names. Yeah, and Jim Claus.
What did you call the one that was bleeding heavily?
Oh, I think that's a good one. No, I think it was after my brother Brian. He was, God rest his, he was a mad fisherman as well. He was
right.
He had a shop in a tackle shop in Gothenburg in Sweden. Yeah, that's basically that. And I suppose initially when I came to the naval base in Holbowl, and I started there a few years before. I was getting fed up with the salmon fishing, so I decided I'd go and try for bass. Now, I wasn't fly fishing for bass, but my dad did teach me how to fly fish as a young fella back in Burris in County Carlow. He taught me on the lawn, and then I went off to down to the Barrow. And probably an interesting story, maybe quickly I'd tell you. I was about 16 or 17, and I had a small little dog. We were tying a fly at night time, actually, fishing with the grey flag. And the brown flag rather, and I was tying the fly, and the dog's up and down the riverbank, and he came behind me, and I tapped him on the head. Next thing, he shot straight into the water, and I said to myself, "You stupid dog." Next thing, 10 seconds later, the dog comes along. It was an otter I had patted in the head. Yeah. So from there, yeah, I used to we had a little punt and a small little boat, and I used to go up the river and just float down in June mainly for the dry fly.
You ended up in Cork then, Richie, was it? And that's
I ended up in Cork then, for the bass fishing. So I started.
Was it what brought you to Cork? Was it originally?
Yeah. I was a young officer in the army up in Galway, and there was a shortage of naval officers here in the naval base because they were getting ships, and the basic training for recruits was the same. So I was sent down for 3 years, and the Navy asked me to transfer then, and I never looked back after that. So I had fixity of tenure.
Wow, and a career on the sea. Fantastic.
And a career on the sea, and they even kindly gave me a year in Lebanon. I was camp commandant out there for a year in in Lebanon so that was a very pleasant experience. Yeah. I retired 3 years early because I had maximized my gratuity and my pension. So I dipped my toes in the water a year or two before I retired. I bought a boat that I reckoned was suitable for fly fishing, just a pure open 17-foot boat, and started off then. And so I never look back, but it is only a hobby, and I still consider myself very much an amateur in relation to bass on the fly. Maybe pollock on the fly. I'd be a little more expert at it now but when I started off, the Jock Brownhurst, who would be my go-to guy at the time, I sought him out, and he helped a lot with the business. And I never looked back really, but I don't advertise. for business. It is purely a hobby, and I just like to stress again that I still consider myself an amateur and learning all the time.
Do you find yourself like, had you started targeting the bass on the lures and then you just kind of found yourself just graduating more and more to the fly and just decided?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly how it went there. I always loved the fly fishing. The salmon fishing on the fly I love, but the trout in particular. So I decided that I'm gonna start switching to the fly. And when I started the business, it was mainly for fly fishing. But up to that, I had been doing a lot of lure fishing and a lot of float fishing for bass, which I found was very effective as well. Yeah.
Is it much, do you find, because I noticed from chatting to lads saying West Cork, Richie, that they're having to go, they would have been kind of from the shore, but now you're finding you're kind of having to go offshore now more so in terms of finding the fish, that it's that bit easier when you can go out to marks.
Yeah, I don't honestly believe that the fish aren't there. I just I firmly believe that they're there, all right, but guys are catching them at night time, for instance. Now they're switching to night fishing for bass. I give an example of that guy I was telling you about who's doing so well here in the harbour, Becky Collins. He was using a soft plastic, a certain colour, and he was murdering fish for 2 years in a row. He had great fun, and in fairness to him, he lets everything back. But he was totally frustrated and said to me, I said, well, just change colour. So he was fishing with the normal colour that he was fishing with, and then he said he'd switch over, and the minute he switched the colour on that lure, he started catching fish again.
Yeah. What colour was it?
Well, I told him to switch to what was the mackerel version,
Okay.
All right.
But yeah.
Fair play to you.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen often here. We normally get interference when an answer question like that. Listen, Richie, you were talking there about very interested there about the boat, that you got a boat. So, and for anybody who wants to see, there's a great picture of you on your website on Airbass in the boat, and it looks to me like you're obviously drifting. It's a Seahawk 17 foot, yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's a Seahawk 17 foot, yeah.
It looks to me like you're lock style fishing almost in that picture. So, do you set the boat up on a drift with it?
We set the boat up on a drift, but unlike on the I wouldn't be a guru on the lakes now. I'd be very much. I've only done it a few times, but we do the opposite. We cast into the wind. So,
right.
Particularly for the Pollock on the fly, now you cast into the wind, and you basically wait. We're using HD lines, and they're very much weighted, and you have to get down to the Pollock to catch them. I suppose one of the secrets of Pollock fishing is I get guys to hold the rod down maybe into the water at the start, particularly trout guys, because if you strike, you won't catch. The Pollock are trying to suck the fly into their mouths, so you'll get this most unusual sensation. You feel the pluck, pluck, pluck. that Pollock could pluck 5 or 6 times before you know you're on, and then you do what you call, as you know yourselves, you strip strike.
Yeah.
So
the left hand.
Yeah.
The left hand. Yeah.
So it's and we're using quite small flies. We've discovered that the small flies, size 1 hook, is just ideal. We're getting 6, 8, 10 pound Pollock on the fly, and you have to bully them. The minute you have a big Pollock on, you just have to bully him. You can't let him down. If you let him down, he's going to wrap himself around the kelp, and that's the end of it.
That's amazing. I'm actually intrigued by the Pollock fishing, and it's great to get you on to talk about it, because I think it's something that's open for all of us there. Like I was just saying to you beforehand, and I'm really into the bass as well, but I think Pollock is a fish that's there for everybody. They're all over the coast in Ireland. So that's why I'm intrigued to ask you. So let's say somebody was thinking of going at it. So what rods do you use? What's the gear that you use for them? I use the ID line anyway. Yeah,
it's an airflow cold saltwater a sniper. Yeah, 40 plus. Yeah, so it's that's one. There is another one that I use, which is it's a Rio outbound. So basically, to get down to the fish, and we find that when you're actually taking in the fly, just kind of a foot of a retrieve every time, and just nice and slow, and just if you have to keep moving the fly even when you feel it take.
Yeah. Now, so you're casting into the wind. Now, a lot of lads could have a problem with that, but you don't have to cast that far, I presume.
No, and that's the beauty of the Pollock on the fly, Tom, is that I bring youngsters out who've never had, and adults as well, who've never held a fly rod in their lives. And what we do is we just let the fly and the line in the water, and they just let the line off, and I keep an eye on them, and I tell them, look, you count to, depending what depth we're on, if we're on 30 feet, I'd say maybe count to 15, count to 15, and then start retrieving. So it's youngsters pick it up so easily, and people who've never fly fished before, and they absolutely love it. Yeah.
How did you get into the pollock side of it? Was it because you found they were more common and it was easier to kind of introduce clients to that side of it? Like, was that the kind of transition into that?
Yeah, that was basically it there. What I say to clients now is we can do all the whole session. I have clients that come back to me all the time, and they're just mad about the pollock on the fly, because there are days, and people find it very hard to believe that we are actually catching nearly every cast. Yeah, there are days when we those two South African guys, Jacques and Bads, we were out together in a boat, and we had, I think it was about 4 or 5 hour session. We had 120 pollock to the boat.
Wow.
We had about 40 each. It's just incredible. Yeah.
And when and where do you target them? I'm not looking for specifics.
Yeah, no. I don't, actually,
Coordinates.
Well, I'll give you simple coordinates if you're in a boat for pollock on the fly. Is go to where you see lobster pots. That's where the pollock are. So but do be careful, because as we found, you tend to hook yourself up on a pot very easily as well. Yeah. But yeah, it's time and tide. Sometimes there are times when in the summer when it's so good that it doesn't really matter what time of the tide.
Are tides important with the bass, aren't they?
They are. I would say, yeah. If I can, for instance, there's guy. I met guys on a beach one time, and they were fishing the first 3 hours of the flood, but I knew particularly that this particular spot was good for an hour after. So they were heading off. Richie, you're too late. I know, I couldn't get out in time. So they were only gone around the corner, and I was into a bass. And
you went running after them, but they were gone.
Yeah, I went, come back quick. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's what you're saying there, that way to work the session sounds fantastic. That, depending, of course, if the time is right for that 4 or 5 hour period, but just to give an hour maybe target on the bass and then to concentrate on pollock, that sounds really, really good.
Yes, yeah. That's an option. Or as I say, there are so many clients coming back now. They just want pollock on the fly anyway, and they're happy. But just to say, guys, from the shore, it's slightly different for pollock on the fly. I don't do a huge amount of it, but if somebody wants to target pollock on the fly, dusk, coming up to dusk, they tend to come up to the top of the water, and a bit easier to target them then.
So the tides, spring tides, that doesn't matter?
No, I'm not a mad fan of spring tides for bass in the harbour, but spring tides for pollock doesn't make a huge difference. Once you're not, no, I would say there's a place called Harbour Rock here in the mouth of the harbour, and you just on a spring tide you just wouldn't be able to cover it properly, because the water is so, the current is so fast out there. But if you get outside, I try and get outside the harbour if I can. My license allows me to go a certain amount outside the harbour. So the big spring tides don't seem to affect the pollock that much. But it does the bass. The bass have more of an opportunity to go places where they don't normally go. So I find it a little more difficult.
So are you looking for, and again, just for, say, for the shore angler, are you looking for the kind of the rocky spots, the kind of drop offs, the shelves, that kind of area? Is that what you're looking for?
Yes. Yeah. If you can find deep water in front of you, there's an app called Navionics UK Holland, and you can stand on the shore and you can see straight in front of you what depth of water is in front of you. It's an absolutely brilliant app. I use it even on the boat for targeting certain areas as well. You can stand on the shore. It'll give you exact water depth in front of you at low water. But it also gives you the bottom generally as well in front of you. Is it a sandy bottom, or you can see the mark? You can see the marks. You can see the actual pinnacles and whatever in front of you.
I don't know about you, Tom, as well. It's really interesting that you're saying this. Are you seeing this as a new branch that kind of maybe a lot more anglers are looking to now actually specifically target the pollock? You were saying obviously you've got those South African clients.
Yeah.
Because automatically, when we spoke to Jason O'Riordan earlier this year about saltwater fly fishing, and it was primarily about bass. But it's really interesting now that you're saying there's kind of anglers maybe are starting to kind of actually move away from bass maybe and specifically target pollock, knowing you have a better chance of actually catching a fish. These two South Africans, they're not clients.
They're friends of mine. We meet up every. Well, I meet Jock all the time, but Bads comes every other year. But their go-to now at this stage it's pure pollock. They just don't care about bass. They'd like to catch a bass the odd time, but it's so prolific. It's so good. And it's such fun. I just can't understand. There is a certain snob element to pollock on pollock fishing, and guys say to me, sure, pollock is there's no good fight in a pollock. These guys are talking about using a broomstick at 150 feet of water. When you're using an 8-9 weight rod and on a fly you have a 5 or 6 pound pollock, you know about it. You absolutely know about it.
What kind of flies are you using?
Mainly trousers, small flies with size 1. For the listeners, they're dumbbell eyes which are weighted, and the beauty of it is of the dumbbell eyes. They bring the float. They bring the hook up. They turn the hook upside down, so that when you're going down through the kelp and the weed generally, that you're not getting half as snagged as you would normally with a normal. Yeah, but again, size small. We have used at the start, and there's a client of mine came with very big flies one day that he wanted to try out, that his nephew had tied up, and they worked fine. But we found now that and it's amazing that the smaller flies they're only in old money, I suppose, 2 inches long, even an inch and a half.
And when do you start targeting them, Richie?
From kind of the middle of May on would be the best. Right up until, and the beauty of this for the freshwater anglers is that right up until November, we can target the pollock, So guys who are really cheesed off that they're no longer being able to cast a fly, that they can come out in October, November. There was 2 guys now who came out with me, Aidan Walsh and John Meehan comes out with me a lot. He loves the pollock and the fly, but Aidan wanted the extra challenge of and it was early October and cheesed off that all the season was over. So we targeted bass for that particular day. He just wanted bass, and he had travelled a fair distance for it. So we did actually get 3 lovely bass that day.
Oh, nice.
About 5 or 6 pounds weight. So they were delighted. I was even more happy because I was on a hiding to nothing if you get tagged.
Just there on the pollock, is it a question, and I asked this for myself, is it that the pollock move inshore from May to, let's say, November, and then in that period they move further out, is it?
Yes, I think what tends to happen, Tom, is that because of the storms and whatever, that the ground gets turned up a fair bit, so that they tend to move off.
Right.
And they move out to deeper ground, obviously. But you would pick up the odd one in the winter, you know. And an interesting one now. We were fishing we had a huge mark of fish. I think it was in November. No, it was actually January. That was a challenge that Jacques set for ourselves, Dr. Jacques, that we'd catch a pollock on the fly in every single month of the year.
All right.
Yes. Yeah. So it was back in January, 2 or 3 years ago. We saw a huge mark of fish on the finder, and we said we couldn't. We thought they were pollock, and we couldn't catch them. And next thing, Jacques said, it's a very fast strip.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, bang, coalfish. And
wow.
Yeah. And I mean, okay, they were only 1 or 2 pounds weight, maybe three was that big. But by God, just that change of stripping fast, really fast. We did actually meet the challenge. We did actually catch a
you got one, yeah.
Every single
so you've completed. You've got a pollock on the fly every month of the year.
Every month of the year.
Yeah. Excellent. With all of this, actually, do you ever feel like going back trout or salmon fishing again?
No, there's the problem, and there's two sides to that problem. I don't want to do so much guiding that it's going to ruin my own fishing, my own enjoyment of fishing.
Yes.
The other, yeah, definitely. This year I didn't buy a salmon license, because I don't know, when you have fishing like that, why would you waste your time on the river? No, I love the river and all the rest, but you do like to catch an odd fish, you know. And I don't know whether I've been unlucky or maybe I need a good guide when I'm going salmon fishing. But I haven't been. I bought all the beats and bought the license, and I suppose maybe gone 5 or 6 times in the last couple of years, you know. So it was a no-brainer, really.
Do you find a lot more salmon anglers during the summer, Richie, or heading towards the coast?
Yeah, I get guys who'd ring me, or guys I'd know who saying, "Look, Richie, the river's on its bare bones. There's no water. Will you bring us out for the next 2 days?" And they've been there, or they'd ring and they'd never been with me before. Some in fairness to some of the salmon guides down there, they'd pass them on to me, you know, to say, "Look, this guy will bring you out. At least you catch fish, you know."
I do want to ask you just on the bass, because you were saying you reckon it's not the numbers are down. You reckon they're just wising up, are they? Like in terms of,
I tend to think that they are there and that they are wising up. Yeah. That a lot of if a mark is getting hammered, you won't catch, you know. They may not be number. No, I did fish a lot in the 80s and would be catching 5 or 6 bass, not on the fly at the time. Now with lure fishing and float fishing and whatever. But it would not be as good now as it was back in the 80s. But their bass are there. They're definitely there. But probably not in good as numbers as back in the 80s.
In fairness, you're not the only guy I've heard say that in terms of the wisening up of the bass. Like, you know, it's fishing pressure, they reckon, is actually, and I've heard it said as well, like what lads say down in the estuaries, West Cork, and there'd be lads with the lure not catching, and there's no fish there, and then a fellow would come in with the live sand eel and you'd be pulling them out, like.
Yeah. I mean, we had this French ribs came over. They're still coming over, but they were unlicensed and going to the marks, and 5 or 6 in a sea rider, and absolutely hammering the marks for 3 or 4 weeks. And I was at nothing. And eventually, the pressure was put on them to get a license, and they got a license for one of the boats. But there's one boat coming now, but they tortured the marks, and I know there's no point in me going to those marks when those guys are around. They come in normally in September.
It's funny. I would have thought that as well with the boat. that you would have had, greater availability or greater stretch of water that you could, target the bass, and therefore it would have been easier than, say, for a shore angler who's much more limited. But even you're still finding it tough, like.
Yeah. There's no, there are obviously marks out there that I don't know, but the traditional marks that you'd find, you might the odd time stumble. Myself and Jacques and Kevin McLaughlin were out one particular May, I think it was. So can I explain maybe quickly that the bass leave the harbour because the water gets cold, so they leave the harbour and they go. We're not 100% sure where they go, but we found in a mid-May, it was 2 years ago, we could see a massive shoal of bass underneath us, and I mean the water was crystal clear. There were double figure bass in it. I reckon they were congregating, ready to come into the harbour. When we tagged the bass, the last of the bass came into the harbour in mid-June. So kind of mid-May on. Some of them I think may have come back late April, but the last of them were back in the harbour. The bigger fish I think maybe in mid-June. But yeah, they do congregate, and they congregate to leave as well.
It's interesting. It's very interesting. And do you, Richie, just on that, when you're going fishing, are you always out in the boat? That's your kind of natural thing. You'll always head off to the boat. You'd never just.
No, actually, no. I love fishing from the shore as well. So yeah, I go to the odd bass mark, and I suppose that my winter go-to, which is kind of would be for the mullet on the fly.
We'll probably
we haven't even touched on that.
Yeah, we probably that's a future episode, because that is something I've been interested in as well. Like, and I think
I've heard it called the Irish bonefish. No,
the Irish bonefish, yeah, or the British call it the British bonefish. Yeah. It's I suppose we can maybe talk about it some other time. Yeah, but
love to.
It's kind of a winter sport,
So listen, before we go, we ask everybody that comes on to chat to us, Richie, about what their most memorable fish was that they caught on the fly. Doesn't have to be the biggest. Most memorable.
Most memorable. Okay, the most memorable would have been I would have been dry fly fishing for trout with floating down the River Barrow at home in Burris in County Carlow, and this trout took me up and down the river. And next thing I realised, it was a salmon. And I had 4 pound breaking strain line and a small trout fly rod. And he just tore me around the place. I'd say I was in him for close to half an hour, and eventually got him in. He was about 6-7 pounds weight. Yeah, that would have been my most memorable fish by far. Yeah.
Come here, tell us, do you have a most memorable fish on the fly on the saltwater?
I got a specimen mullet on the fly one time. Yeah, and that was. She, I don't know, tore me off. Now, a lot of the time, especially if you're out in the surf and you're fishing them in the surf, they'll take you down to the backing most of the time, But this particular fish went all over the place and really tore the reel off, It was unbelievable. Yeah.
What weight was it?
It was close on 6 pounds, I think it was. I think 5 is the... 5 pounds is the specimen weight for a mullet.
So you can actually you can bear testament to the fact that they're known as, let's say, the Irish bonefish. They do fight like crazy. Yeah.
It's incredible. Yeah. They really do tear. They go like clappers. Yeah. Brilliant. Like a steam train.
Come here, Rich. Actually, just what's your personal best pollock, or one of your friends?
Best pollock was just over the 10 pounds weight. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. If you go into my site there, you can see photographs, I think, of various. There's articles in relation to the most recent article now would have a fine big pollock on the fly that we got this year. So but around the 10 pound mark would have been the biggest one. Yeah.
And there's some colours on them, isn't it? That gold.
Oh yeah, incredible. I mean, you get different colours. We even pick up the odd, talking about colours, we even pick up the odd cod on the fly. You get beautiful kelpie cod.
Class. Yeah. We'll put a link up onto your site when we're putting the podcast out. So people can have a look at that. Yeah.
So just tell us, Richie, what's the website if people are interested in contacting you for some kayaking down in Cork Harbour?
Yeah, www.corkbass.com.
Well, it's been fascinating finding out about the pollock on the fly, because it's another species, another window for anglers to try, and it's becoming ever more popular. So we'll keep an eye on your future catches in 2023. Richie Ryan, thanks a million for joining us.
Thanks very much, guys. Thanks a million.
Our thanks to Richie Ryan for joining us on the show. And don't forget to rate, review, and follow the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Plus, you can keep up to date on IrelandOnTheFly.com, as well as on Instagram, and myself and Tom will be back with another episode about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.